It's a beautiful morning. I think I'll go outside for a while and just smile. Just taking some clean, fresh air. Oh, no sense in staying inside if the weather's
Good morning, friends. It's good to have all of you here with us this morning. I'm Heather Houston. I'm the Executive Director of Scenic Houston. And welcome to our Scenic Houston's breakfast series called Scenic Mornings. This is our first one that we're doing of 2021. And this morning, we're focusing on our beautiful Buffalo Bayou. This one's called Don't Mess with Buffalo Bayou. And thanks again for all of you joining us this morning. For those of you unfamiliar with Scenic Houston, we are the only organization dedicated to preserving and enhancing Houston's visual environment, particularly as viewed by the traveling public. Through our mission-driven initiatives, Scenic Houston is transforming the character of roadways across Houston, educating stakeholders, advocating for high-quality scenic policies, and elevating scenic standards in regional communities and cities around Houston. We are also celebrating scenic champions. And of course, Buffalo Bayou is one of our main scenic champions here in Houston. We believe that everyone has the right to live in a community surrounded by beautiful, thoughtfully planned public spaces, and we are really committed to realizing this vision. We launched this breakfast last year as a way to bring Houstonians together to discuss important issues concerning Houston's scenic character. We are thrilled that you have joined us this morning for an engaging conversation about Buffalo Bayou, arguably one of Houston's most beautiful landscapes in our city. With its copious trees, bountiful wildlife, miles of running and biking trails, and natural landscape, this urban river provides a space for Houstonians to enjoy the outdoors, exercise, and experience nature. Please join me as I welcome our panelists this morning. We're very excited to have all of our panelists join us. They are wonderful. They are all experts, all in their own field. And we're so thankful that they agreed to do this for Scenic Houston this morning. They've all been friends for a long time, and we are greatly appreciative. So first, I'd like to introduce Jim Blackburn. Jim is a professor in the practice of environmental law in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Rice University. At Rice, Jim serves as the co-director of the Severe Storm Prediction, Education, and Evacuation from Disaster Center, and has been responsible for the development of landscape-scale green space solution for surge damage mitigation. So welcome, Jim. Next, we have Susan Chadwick. She is a journalist and a writer, and she grew up on Buffalo Bayou. Susan is the president and executive director of Save Buffalo Bayou, a nonprofit that advocates for that bayou and its many tributary creeks and streams, forests, and wetlands. Susan is a graduate of Columbia University and is an accomplished author, having written about art, architecture, urban, and political issues for a variety of publications. So welcome, Susan. We are also pleased to have Guy Hagstadt join our panel. Guy is the Senior Vice President of Parks and Civic Projects at the Kinder Foundation and a member of the Buffalo Bayou Partnership Board. As a consultant on Buffalo Bayou Park for the Buffalo Bayou Partnership, an advisor to the Houston Parks Board on Bayou Greenways, Guy has been instrumental in some of Houston's most iconic green spaces. Guy previously served as Special Assistant for Urban Design to Mayor Bill White and was Director of Planning and Development for Central Houston, Inc. We are thrilled to have you join us this morning, Guy. Welcome. Next, we have David Ott. He is with the Hanover Company, and he's also a member of Scenic Houston's Board of Directors. He is in charge of this wonderful new development right next to Buffalo Bayou Park. He's responsible for the acquisition, planning, and development of over $2 billion in projects. He's developing Autry Park, a 14-acre mixed-use development project going up between Allen Parkway and West Gray. This vast walkable development embraces the concept of an integrated urban lifestyle with nature. David serves on the boards of Buffalo Bayou Partnership, Trees for Houston, and of course, Scenic Houston. Welcome, David.
Morning.
And definitely not last but not least, we have Marlene Gaffricht. She is the chair of Scenic Houston, and she's going to serve as this morning's moderator. She's the director of planning at Metro National and is currently serving as our board chair. Prior to joining Metro National, Marlene served as City of Houston's director of planning. With her land development and public policy expertise, we couldn't think of a better moderator for this morning's discussion. So welcome, Marlene.
Thank you, Heather.
Before I turn the floor over to you, Marlene, I'd just like to send a special thank you this morning to our sponsor, New Leaf Real Estate. We appreciate their partnership and sponsorship, and they made this morning possible. So thank you. And Marlene, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay, great. Thank you. So today's discussion is going to focus on the history of Buffalo Bayou, its significance to Houston on several different levels, benefits of leaving it in a more natural state, and why the Corps' channelization proposal is unacceptable. But before we get started, what I want to do is I want us to think about Buffalo Bayou as a public realm, because it really is for the use of the public. And I want to quote Alex Garvin from his book, What Makes a Great City? And what Alex wrote is the people who use great cities continually change the public realm so that it meets current needs without impairing the ability of future generations to continue doing so. And I think we have to think about Buffalo Bayou and how it's historically been used, but how we use it today and in the future. And some of our conversation will focus on that topic. So Susan, I'd like to start out with you. I know you grew up on Buffalo Bayou and have a great historical knowledge of Houston's beautiful river. When so many of Houston's bayous and creeks were stripped, straightened, and covered with concrete, how is it that Buffalo Bayou escaped that fate? Can you give us a little bit of a history here?
Yes, thank you, Marlene. It's surprising, but many people don't know that Buffalo Bayou is a living river filled with wildlife, including beaver and giant alligator snapping turtles, and not a big drainage ditch. But then many people don't actually get to see or experience the bayou except when they're driving over a bridge. That's one reason why our great public parks are so important for people to experience and learn about the bayou and nature. Buffalo Bayou is something like 18,000 years old, and in a few places like Memorial Park, you can read this magnificent geologic history in the exposed banks that have been standing there for thousands of years. The bayou rises out of the ground way out in the Katy Prairie and winds to the east for some 50 miles through the center of Houston, passing through suburbs and downtown, becoming the Houston Ship Channel, and finally emptying into the San Jacinto River and Galveston Bay. It is the center of our natural drainage system. Most other bayous flow into it, along with numerous small creeks and streams. The bayou that the native people and early settlers saw was a narrow river with steep high banks with huge sweet smelling magnolias, tall pines, and other trees that hung over the stream. Beyond those forests were vast prairies where buffalo roamed. Early Houston was a port, of course, starting right there downtown at Allen's Landing. The timber along the banks was cut down and milled for lumber, and beginning in the early 20th century, the bayou east of downtown was dredged and lined with wharves. Houston is now one of the largest and busiest ports in the nation. In the 1930s, after a series of floods, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers started stripping and straightening our beautiful rivers and lining them with concrete. It was a deeply flawed concept that in the end only makes flooding worse. But in 1937, the Harris County Flood Control District was established to work with the Corps of Engineers to do this. Then in the 1940s, far upstream on what was then prairie and farmland, the Corps built 2 earthen dams to control the flow into Buffalo Bayou when it rains. In the years that followed, the Corps, in partnership with the Flood Control District, stripped and straightened the bayou just below the dams from what is now Highway 6 all the way to just below what is now Beltway 8. This eventually became Terry Hershey Park. And in the late 1950s, they did the same to Buffalo Bayou in what is now Buffalo Bayou Park between downtown and the Shepherd Bridge. The engineers continued destroying our streams throughout the 1960s, stripping, straightening, and smothering in concrete white oak and braised bayous, which were once beautiful wild streams like Buffalo Bayou. But their plan to channelize winding forested Buffalo Bayou from below what is now Terry Hershey Park down to Shepherd was thwarted by influential people, including then Congressman George Bush, Alderman George Mitchell, our founding board president, Frank Smith, as well as the local women's garden clubs, primarily organized by environmentalist Terry Hershey, who lived on Buffalo Bayou, and her friends and neighbors. Over the decades, the trees and vegetation downstream in what is now Buffalo Bayou Park grew back. But in 2010, the Harris County Flood Control District thought it had a better idea of how the river should work and bulldozed the banks again, removing a lot of trees and vegetation. The result is now a continuing cycle of costly maintenance and repair in that beautiful, much-loved park, with the most recent $10 million taxpayer-funded project leaving the lower bank stripped and lined with ugly, unnatural concrete rubble. Around the same time, 2010, the Flood Control District began promoting a similar channelization project, calling it Restoration, that would have stripped and dredged and rerouted one of our last remaining publicly accessible forested stretches of the bayou as it flows past Memorial Park, a historic nature area. Save Buffalo Bayou was founded to stop this project, which among other things was based on a misunderstanding of the primary kind of erosion we have in Buffalo Bayou, which is slumping. The banks slide down vertically. The project would have failed. Native vegetation on the banks has a vital role in holding the banks together, absorbing and cleansing the water, providing wildlife habitat. It's also important to understand that rivers have memories. Straightened, they will seek out their natural channels. Meanders have a function too. Nature has a purpose. But there will always be people who don't like nature, who think nature is messy. Even today, we are fighting damaging new projects on the bayou in Memorial Park and below the Bayou Bend Collection and Gardens opposite the Hog Bird Sanctuary. Sadly, we may soon have very little left of our beautifully natural Buffalo Bayou.
Thank you, Susan. Guy, you oversaw the development of Buffalo Bayou Park, and it's an amazing example of how to bring alive, ecologically, environmentally speaking, and to provide a respite and wonderful using space surrounding Buffalo Bayou. On weekends, I just see so many people there cycling, the dog park. Can you tell us a little bit about the origin of the story? How did this park come to be?
All right. Well, thank you, Marlene. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and such a great panel. I'll start by saying, Susan gave a wonderful history that Houston wouldn't exist without Buffalo Bayou, and I think we need to keep that in mind. And with regard to the park, its origin really dates back to 1912. That is when planner and landscape architect Arthur Comey produced a master plan for the city of Houston's new park system. And it proposed linear parks along our bayous and then major parks that ended up resulting in the development of Herman Park, the acquisition of Memorial Park, Mason Park, and others. And I think the interesting thing is that Houstonians voted for park bonds, and for about 20, 25 years, our city actually implemented a master plan. We acquired thousands of acres of parkland, and including hundreds of acres along Buffalo Bayou, leading out to Shepherd, and then culminating in the acquisition of Memorial Park in 1924. As Susan mentioned, we suffered from devastating floods in 1929 and 1935. And unfortunately, the focus shifted away from parks on our bayous to kind of a pure focus on engineering and controlling floods on our bayous. So this land that was acquired as parkland ended up being dedicated as a drainage easement starting in 1939. And that set the stage for the channelization work that Susan mentioned in the late 1950s. Fortunately, Buffalo Bayou from downtown to Shepherd was not lined with concrete, but the channel was straightened. And most of the vegetation in that area was literally scraped away. And even in 1957, that was controversial in Houston, Texas. The other kind of mistake that was made is that they thought, well, we'll channelize the Bayou and then walk away. And so for a half a century, little was done in this area. It was, as Susan mentioned, the Bayou was just considered a drainage ditch. And silt built up, and vines took over, and other invasive vegetation. And that was the situation that we confronted in the early 2000s. Buffalo Bayou Partnership issued a visionary plan for 10 miles of Buffalo Bayou from Shepherd down to the Turning Basin in 2002. And it called for the restoration of this environment as a passive green park. And then in the few years later, Nancy and Rich Kinder, aware of that plan, aware of the success of projects like the Sabine Promenade by Buffalo Bayou Partnership and government agencies, approached the partnership with a catalyst gift for this stretch of land that they were aware was in public hands and essentially lying fallow and largely unusable and inaccessible by the public. And that led to the public-private partnership that was established in 2010 between the City of Houston, Buffalo Bayou Partnership, Harris County Flood Control District, with this catalyst funding from the Kinder Foundation. And it was beautiful timing because that part of the city was growing rapidly. We had, as is the case in so many parts of Houston, a shortage of parks within a short walk of people's new homes. And the park came on the line, and as you said, Marlene, is just heavily, heavily used today.
Guy, just a quick follow-up. What do you think are the primary benefits in your mind of Buffalo Bayou Park, environmentally, but also for Houston citizens?
Well, I think that's a great question, and it's certainly something we keep in mind. And I would actually add a third to that list. I mean, environmentally and clearly, we heard what Susan had to say, and I think we need to acknowledge that there's differences of opinion on this. But in with regard to the team that proceeded, the first goal was to undo the damage that was done in the 1950s. As Susan mentioned, rivers have memories, and the Corps of Engineers literally straightened the channel and eliminated meanders. And part of the work was to the extent possible, reestablish some of those meanders and allow the Bayou to be kind of a little bit more of what it wants to be rather than fighting those natural forces. We, as Susan said, removed a lot of vegetation, and I think that was really painful for a lot of folks. And one goal was to kind of reestablish a kind of a more natural ecosystem with establishing more native vegetation rather than the invasives that can wash down the Bayou in a flood from people's backyards. We worked on water quality. Those cutoff meanders often had very poor water quality. So this is something that kind of goes unrecognized, but there are literally pumps that circulate water into these cutoff meanders to allow them to achieve better water quality. And then with regard to the flood control district's work, again, it's painful to watch when it's happening. But the goal was to stabilize the banks using as much as possible natural techniques. Now, I'll acknowledge a lot of riprap has been used, especially post-Harvey. But the goal is to reestablish vegetation in those areas. And in fact, I'm meeting with the Buffalo Bayou Partnership and environmental experts tomorrow to start the process of doing that revegetation work. Details like the Waugh Bridge Bat Colony, taking great care around it, working with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department on it, and then establishing a program to maintain the area, unlike what happened in the 1950s, periodic removal of invasive vegetation and taking care of the silt, such as the 7-foot drifts that were in place after Hurricane Harvey, which was an enormous task. With regard to people, I think you said it, the recreation is a real benefit for Houstonians, easily accessible park for thousands of folks in the central city. You can not only see the Bayou now, but you can get to it. And, but it also offers, because it's in a more urban setting than, let's say, Memorial Park, dining, dog parks, gardens, other types of more urban recreation, art exhibits, things like that. That third category I want to talk about is civic. I think this stretch of the Bayou has been considered Houston's front door, but it was a little bit lacking. I think we're now proud to kind of show those views of Houston, the skyline, the Bayou, and this beautiful park. We can still host large events, but unlike before, those events don't have to wreak havoc in the natural landscape. And I think most importantly and most fundamentally, I think more and more Houstonians, as Susan mentioned, are aware because they can see this beautiful landscape. And I think beyond Buffalo Bayou, I think more people can now recognize that Houston itself can be beautiful. And I'm hoping that that is resulting and continuing to result in a mind shift change for all of us here in Houston.
Thank you, Guy. Just a comment. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat because we will allow time at the end for people to submit questions, and we'll try to get to your questions. So David, your work with Hanover Companies has put you in the lead on the Autry Park project. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're creating with that project?
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me this morning. We were lucky enough to assemble together approximately 14 acres. I refer to it as kind of the western gateway to Buffalo Bayou Park and Allen Parkway. What we've really focused on trying to do is improve the infrastructure and create a really direct connection into this wonderful park that has been created by the efforts of so many people. We've got a new lighted intersection that will be installed just east of Shepherd at the intersection with a newly created street called Buffalo Park Drive. We've extended the original Autry Park, which is a small little park a lot of people don't know too well, at the southeast corner of Allen Parkway and Shepherd. We've eliminated a slip lane there, or we are going to be eliminating a slip lane there that will extend the hard corner of that piece of Autry Park out to the intersection of Shepherd and Allen Parkway, and install lighted pedestrian signalization there so that we can improve the access for residents around the park to get into this wonderful park. That was one area that we felt like was lacking here at this end of the park. We're going to be bringing in over 1,400 residential units over time. We have 750 units under construction right now. We've got about 50,000 square feet of retail under construction, primarily restaurants. So the success of restaurants like the Dunleavy in the park, the ability to actually go sit, dine, and really enjoy this wonderful Buffalo Bayou Park is something we're trying to enhance as well. So we've got a lot of great restaurants that are going to be coming in right here overlooking the Bayou. We have a hospitality component that will ultimately get layered in, as well as office. We've got about 340,000 square feet of office planned, and 2 additional multifamily phases that will happen over time. This has been a great effort, partnership with the City of Houston, Tourist 5, Buffalo Bayou Partnership has been extremely collaborative with us as we try to figure out ways that we can become kind of this urban village that really engages into the park with a direct connection. Our partner Lionstone Investments and many others on the design team, Office of James Burnett, has been really pivotal in trying to work with us on how to bring the Bayou into our development. So all of this would not be possible without what's happened with Buffalo Bayou. I can't talk about the project without talking about Buffalo Bayou and how big of an asset that is to the city in every conversation that I have about it. So it would be absolutely tragic if all of a sudden we had a concrete lined straightened bayou in front of this development and all of the many other developments that are happening along Island Parkway as a result of the natural state of the bayou and how that has been enhanced by Buffalo Bayou Partnership, Kinders, and others.
So David, just a follow-up question, and this is a little broader than Buffalo Bayou, but just how does having these nice major parks influence development? How does it benefit development? What, as a developer, as you think about developing how or purchasing property, how does having these nice parks like Buffalo, the areas along Buffalo Bayou, make a difference for developers?
Well, I mean, if you think about any great city in the world, it would be a city with wonderful parks and probably wonderful waterways as well. But let's just call it parks and waterways. And Houston is blessed to have an amazing waterway running right through the middle of it with such a rich history, as Guys and Susan have expanded upon that amazing history of the Bayou. And so for us, it's really about, where do you want to live, work, and play, and doing that around Buffalo Bayou Park, Memorial Park, all around Buffalo Bayou, the waterway is something that's extremely attractive. People come home from work and, what we're building here are apartments. People are spending time inside of their apartments, but really they want to get outside and experience what's right within walking distance or a short bike ride from their apartment home or from their office if they're officing here, or we have a future hotel that will be here at some point. And to be able to walk out the door, step into a wonderful park full of miles and miles of trails is something that's you can't put a value on that really. So it is absolutely why we are here and why so many other developers are trying to embrace this wonderful park and spend so much money doing so.
Okay, thank you very much. Jim, I want to turn it over to you. You've published many documents and articles about flood control, especially after Harvey. You've been very involved in drainage issues since Harvey. But tell us why you and many other experts are against the Army Corps of Engineers proposal to channelize Buffalo Bayou. And then I want to take just a little pivot and let's talk about Houston and how Houston is always transitioning. And, whether it's, how we initially started as a city and then evolving and areas developing and redeveloping, but we're going through another transitional phase. And so, why is it important to keep Buffalo Bayou in its natural state? Jim, you're muted.
Of course, I'm muted. Sorry about that. Buffalo Bayou, I think, has evolved as a community symbol, much like I think Houston continues to evolve. And we'll talk more about that later. But I think probably nothing epitomizes that more than the reaction of the community to the study by the Corps of Engineers that came out in October of 2020. There was massive flooding, of course, all over Houston, but Addicks and Barker reservoirs had both extensive flooding above Addicks and Barker, where there was 10,000 homes that were flooded, as well as downstream on Buffalo Bayou when there was massive releases of water, about 15,000 cubic feet per second, which is huge for Buffalo Bayou. Release coming down from Addicks and Barker. So I would start off by saying that the Corps of Engineers study that came out was a disappointment to, I think, almost everybody that read it in many different respects. And it probably united the Houston community in a way that I have never seen it united. Typically, in the past, it has been developers on one side, perhaps an environmentalist on another. And for the first time in my memory, the communities came together to basically say what is being proposed by the Corps of Engineers is not acceptable. And I think, well, I think that's a huge pivot point for Houston and for the Houston kind of almost maturity of Houston. The recognition that we have common goals that we all should pursue. And one of those common goals that emerged was that Buffalo Bayou shouldn't be kind of in a way the first place we go to destroy, but rather it ought to be what is sacrosanct, what is important. There were many solutions that were available that the Corps of Engineers kind of moved over quickly. But I must say, implicit in this core study is a recognition that I think a lot of us are only now really beginning to come to grips with in this community. The Corps of Engineers has a 50-year planning horizon. And the storm Harvey at one time was considered to be a 10,000 to a 40,000 year recurrence event. We're talking about Allison, which was a several thousand year recurrence event. I mean, we're talking about storms that are huge compared to what we have seen in the past. And frankly, the Corps of Engineers methodologies are really not well suited for the challenges that we're facing. And I think we're all learning that. It's true down on the coast. It's true on Buffalo Bayou. It's true out on the west end of town. It's true all over. And the Corps of Engineers is going to have to change its methodologies. And I think that's one of the key lessons coming out of here is that climate change is basically kind of blowing all of our systems. And we really have to come together and come to grips with that. That means the congressional delegation's got to get involved. That means that we have to have discussions publicly that frankly, we've not been good at in Texas, or perhaps in the United States generally. But so I think the challenges that we're facing and the issues with this Corps of Engineers study are huge. There are many solutions that are out there, and there's some excellent ones being pursued by essentially a coalition of environmentalists and developers and engineers and really a whole kind of part of the community coming together. We can dig out and put more storage into attics and Barker reservoirs. There's a lot of smaller reservoirs that could be impoundments that could be placed in the watershed draining into particularly attics reservoir. And there's a tunnel concept that is attractive to many and it's worth evaluating. But again, I think until we change the kind of the way the Corps of Engineers thinks about their planning horizon, I think we'll have trouble with that. To your broader question, I think Buffalo Bayou really symbolizes Houston. Houston is currently redefining itself, and I think we're redefining Buffalo Bayou all the time. We're rethinking. I think what Guy's been talking about, what Susan's been talking about, what David's talking about is all about a kind of a rethinking and a reforming of kind of the way we look at the Bayou. Houston is redefining itself economically right now. We're going to become essentially the center of, according to Bobby Tudor, when he was president of the Houston Partnership, we're going to become the center of net zero carbon thinking in the world. And I think it just as Houston's economy is going to be redefining itself, I think Buffalo Bayou should be thought of in the sense of kind of part of this redefinition of Houston. And when you think about it, it goes from the wonderful nature of the Katy Prairie all the way to through downtown, through the area that we've been talking about that has been so improved, into the East End, and then into the Houston Ship Channel, and then to Galveston Bay. I mean, it permeates everything about Houston. I would say Buffalo Bayou is our symbol, and it's really, to my mind, should be the single rallying point of the entire community. And I think we have an opportunity to do so much more with Buffalo Bayou than we have.
Thank you. We had somebody ask a question, and this is really probably for Guy or even Susan. And that is, you know, with the banks sloughing off, how are we going to stabilize the banks along Buffalo Bayou to prevent them from sloughing off? Guy, I heard you talk about natural vegetation, going along the line of some of the, what I call rocks in cages, for a simple term, but that's really, it really is, you have the soil stabilization methods. So do you want to expand on that further? Because it's a significant investment for the park, and then trying to stabilize the banks is critical. Otherwise, we'll have to keep redoing, the investment over and over.
Marlene, would you like me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think coming out of Harvey, many of us learned the term make room or leave room for the river. And the best approach is to acquire enough land that the river can do what it wants to do. And in fact, the Houston Parks Board and the Harris County Flood Control District, in areas where this is financially possible, are doing just that, acquiring hundreds of acres of land along Greens Bayou, Halls Bayou, and with the goal being that in those cases, we don't need to kind of fix the Bayou's channel quite as much as we have had to do in an area like Buffalo Bayou Park. I am forever grateful for what our civic leaders did 100 years ago, acquiring property along Buffalo Bayou, but quite honestly, it wasn't quite enough. And then along with the channelization work in the 1950s, Memorial Drive and Allen Parkway put some real constraints on that landscape. And so, kind of from my point of view in that particular area, we really do have to be sure that the Bayou, which wants to, as Susan said, rivers have memories, but they also move. They move across the landscape over time. That's hard to do in an urban setting. So working with the Harris County Flood Control District starting in 2010, what we were trying to do is develop approaches that were as environmentally sensitive as possible. And again, it can be painful to watch while it's happening, but ultimately allow for the reestablishment of native vegetation and ecosystems over time. And that's kind of the balancing act we've had to achieve in Buffalo Bayou Park. Now, that doesn't mean that same balancing act approach needs to be used elsewhere. I think there are a lot of different values that we're trying to honor in this process. And at that point, I'd like to turn it over to Susan.
Well, thank you, Guy. And you're absolutely right that making room for the river is an important aspect of dealing with flooding. Widening the channel is like building bigger highways for flooding. It's just going to cause more runoff. You need to be able to make room for the river to flood over into its natural floodplain. Regarding slumping, unfortunately, there really isn't any solution for slumping other than not building on top of a slump, leaving the trees and vegetation in place. The banks are just going to slide down no matter what you do. And so it's really best to get out of the way and make sure that you have adequate room on the floodplain there and it's well planted, and let the Bayou too has its own landscaping plan, and it knows what to do and when. So we're in favor of letting the Bayou fix itself and plant itself. And of course, you're right, there are a lot of invasives that come out of people's yards and gardens that float down, and those do need to be removed. They're not helpful. They don't support anything. We don't think they should be planted in people's yards in the first place. So anyway, that's what I have to say about that.
Okay, thank you. Jim, what are the next steps with the Corps? Are they moving forward, to your knowledge, with any specific proposal?
They're in the process of kind of considering all of the varied comments they've gotten. I mean, they've got the most extensive set of comments and probably the most unified set of comments that they have seen. But I think the next step is really to get the congressional delegation much more involved. I think ultimately the solution to Buffalo Bayou is going to be to essentially change the way that the Corps is kind of enabled to look at these problems. I don't know that we're going to necessarily solve the problem with the current rule structure. What I will say is I think the community is going to have a much better idea of what its priorities are and what it thinks coming out of this. There's already been essentially consensus in the community, I would tell you, around a series of alternatives that were rejected by the Corps. And we may see at least the beginning of the implementation of those. I think, but ultimately we'll see it kind of broken down. I think, first of all, the Corps has to fix the dams. And I think it's really not well known in Houston, although it's been out for a long time. Addicks and Barker are two of the 6 most dangerous dams in the United States, according to the classification of the Corps of Engineers. The gate structures, the release structures have been replaced, but they're still concerned about the structural stability of those reservoirs. And so one, that's got to be fixed. That's priority number 1. 2, the Corps has got to do a lot of work internally on the operation. And I think they have a lot more latitude with what they do internally on Addicks and Barker than what they have in terms of like the tunnel alternative or some of the alternatives external. So I would tell you the Corps is going to work on Addicks and Barker, and the community is going to work on putting together the remainder of the plan. But I think for the first time, you will see the community come together and ultimately solve the problem for the Corps of Engineers and possibly hand it to the congressional delegation for implementation. Would be, to my mind, that would be probably what's going to happen. And I think it would be really a unique event in Houston's history if in fact that occurs.
So let's kind of follow off on the Corps' operation of the dams and the amount of water that they have released down Buffalo Bayou. Doesn't that also contribute to some of the slumping we have seen along Buffalo Bayou? And that's for any of the panelists.
Well, I would just start off by saying 15,000 CFS is a huge amount, but there are releases routinely coming out. And sure, I think that they do provide, but I mean, I think erosion is also a natural aspect of a functioning bayou. And, you know, unfortunately we build on the edges and, you know, property rights come into conflict with kind of the natural functioning of the bayou. So in a way, I think what we're seeing is natural, except for these huge releases that come from the operation of Addicks and Barker.
I think there's maybe another aspect of this, and I'm going to state up front, I'm not an expert on hydrology and fluvial geomorphology, but my understanding of things is that the releases from the dams, not just post-Harvey, but when there's water behind the dams and the Corps of Engineers releases that water, that is not a natural event. It is engineered and controlled and operated by the Corps of Engineers. And one thing that, again, experts I've heard from, you know, talk about is that because there are some property owners along Buffalo Bayou who don't want the lower reaches of their property underwater during these releases, they minimize the volume of the releases and extend those releases over a longer period of time. And what this does is essentially the turbid water prevents any vegetation from surviving being underwater for longer periods of time. And that often is the vegetation at what's called the toe of the slopes. That's, as Susan talked about, is helping kind of reinforce those slopes and resist erosion and bank failures. And so the second aspect is, then they shut the gates down, and there's what's called rapid drawdown, where the water drops pretty suddenly, and all the water that is penetrated into the soil of the banks then wants to drain out because the water level of the bayou is now lower than the water in the soil. And you get, I think, increased bank failures. No doubt, bank failures and erosion are a natural part of the bayou's kind of life. But I think the way the Corps operates the dams on a routine basis exacerbates what is already kind of a challenge, at least in an urban setting.
I just want to point out that they don't actually shut the gates when the water has drained out, that the gates are normally open all the time. Those are dry reservoirs. And they only close the gates when there's going to be a, heavy rainfall below the dams. And I'd also like to point out that the Bayou floods, even when the gates are closed, that we have a serious runoff problem and flooding into Buffalo Bayou. But in some ways, I'm just not sure about, I've heard a lot about this, the rapid drawdown and that sort of thing. But in nature, there is flash flooding, and you have a huge volume of water that can come down all at once and then stop, and so anyway, that's
Susan, what would you like to see happen with Buffalo Bayou now and in the future?
Is this our summary statement you're asking for now?
No, just,
Well, we're in favor of, increased density and the beautiful walkable development closer to the center of Houston. But our motto is nature is the best engineer. We would like to see a better appreciation of how rivers work and why naturally functioning streams are better for us in our world. We would like to see the end of misguided erosion control projects that have not only turned much of Buffalo Bayou into an ugly, lifeless drainage ditch, but also to redirect stormwaters in ways that cause more flooding and erosion elsewhere. We'd like to see the concrete removed from all our streams. We'd like to see better oversight of the effectiveness of the Harris County Flood Control District. We think being able to experience the dynamic power of nature, to see the force of nature etched into the banks of the stream, to watch the bayou gradually restore and replant a sandy bank is a wondrous thing. The bayou has a landscaping plan. We should be in awe of that. Our children need to see that. We need the experience of wildness. Nobody wants the Corps of Engineers to channelize Buffalo Bayou, but flooding begins on the land. We need to focus on what we as individuals, neighborhoods, businesses, and communities can do to stop and store stormwater runoff before it floods our bayous and streams. That means more parks, more trees, more green space, more native gardens instead of lawns, more gravel instead of concrete, more nature-based stormwater infrastructure. It's cheaper, more practical, more effective, and healthier for us.
Thank you, Susan. David, I want to come back to you and talk a little bit about Autry Park and how you're going to incorporate natural elements of the bayou into your project. You touched a little bit with it when you talked about landscape architecture, but can you go into a little more detail?
Sure. We've tried to bring in tree species that are naturally found along the bayou. We're spending a lot of money relocating some large heritage live oaks into the center of the property, and really creating our own park within the development that is connected to the larger park and parks surrounding our development. We've tried to keep kind of an irregular spacing of street trees and bring in a little bit more wild landscape aesthetic. Certainly a little bit more curated than letting the bayou do it itself to our development, but we've tried to make a gesture that, look, we're bringing the aesthetic of Buffalo Bayou in its natural state into our development to try to show that off, because there is a real beauty about that I think people recognize. And then other than that, we've really just tried to provide, kind of and become a conduit for people to access the park more easily. We're fortunate that the existing hike and bike trail that's there is right on the back of curb across Allen Parkway from our development. So it was easy for us to tie directly into that with pedestrian signalization, creating new bike lanes along West Dallas, creating new sidewalks along Shepherd and along Allen. And really just what I would hope is that as development continues to be spurred by what's happened with Buffalo Bayou Park and Memorial Park, that we'll see more developments really try to engage these parks in a meaningful way at the periphery of these parks, and allow for easy access into the parks for pedestrian, bikes, and not not become a barrier of any kind with whatever development happens, but in fact actually become more of a conduit for more people to access into the park easily via bikes and pedestrian runners, walkers, etc. I think that the trail system will suffer failures over time, unfortunately, just as big events happen. But I think we need to stick with the dedication to kind of repair trails as needed, and just recognize that nature is going to take its toll from time to time, but that vast majority of the time these trails and the park enhancements are going to allow city dwellers to really enjoy nature in the middle of the city, and allow Houston to continue to try to recruit companies and be competitive with other cities that have these great parks and great lifestyle amenities that Houston is going to have to continually invest in and make better in order to be competitive and attract companies that we're going to need here to sustain this large city. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a question. Is there a plan to physically connect Buffalo Bayou Park to Memorial Park? And if so, how would this be achieved? I'm looking at Guy and
Yeah, I think Susan's going to have some comments about this too. I think as we move upstream of Shepherd, we're really getting into a discussion about balancing values. David just made a great case for the trails and recreation and the benefits they provide to the city, but we're also entering a stretch of Buffalo Bayou that, while kind of under stress, is unchannelized. And so to say that there's a plan would be an overstatement. I think that there's a desire to see such a connection. I mean, when I'm on Memorial Drive and I see parents with kids and joggers and cyclists trying to navigate the less than 4 foot wide sidewalk along Memorial Drive, getting between the two parks, it's really scary. Unfortunately, the city of Houston and others stopped acquiring public property just upstream of Shepherd. So we don't have the benefit of the existing public property that we had in Buffalo Bayou Park. And so, as I think Jim referenced, there are private property rights. There are folks who own that property and have opinions about that kind of thing. And it's kind of almost a landmine of different issues. Almost every stretch of the bayou between Buffalo Bayou Park and Memorial Park has, I'll call them vested interests that you have to respect and deal with. And then you have what's required to actually build the trail. And I think that's where Susan would certainly have some comments.
Well, there really isn't room for a 10-foot wide concrete sidewalk along the bank there. And we really think the city should look into closing off some of the lanes of Memorial Drive. I agree that it's really dangerous and difficult to get, that the sidewalk there is broken and narrow. And there's a lot of heavy traffic, but do we really need 6 lanes going of a Memorial Drive, 3 lanes going each way? Is it not possible perhaps to dedicate, as other cities do, a lane going each way for people to walk and bike, and even maybe public transportation like they do in Paris? All of those lanes are shared between buses and taxis and bicyclists, and I really think that it would be a much more practical and direct solution to, dedicate a couple of those lanes to to the people that need to be out there biking and walking and strolling with their kids.
And the interesting thing is the city just changed their sidewalk standards for along major thoroughfares and, you know, major roadways. And so your sidewalks are 6 to 10 feet wide, which I think is very positive and potentially could help with the ability for connection rather than do the connection along the Bayou. You could,
Yeah.
but you have a constrained right of way. So it's all about figuring out the appropriate number of lanes and how many people are cycling and how many people are walking, what that should all look like.
And certainly a reconfiguration of Memorial Drive has been, I won't say studied in detail, but that concept has been looked at, and it's an option. It is an option. Post-pandemic, we'll see how traffic volumes kind of evolve. And I'm a frequent driver on Memorial Drive, and the volumes are definitely down. Now, is that going to continue? That's a big question. And again, it's, I think, a balancing act.
It is. Jim, did you have any ideas on the connection between Buffalo Bayou and Memorial Park?
No, just to, to emphasize almost what Guy was saying, in terms of it, really being the balance with private property rights. And, on the one hand, it would be, lovely to have much greater unfettered access along the bank, kind of almost throughout. But there are private property aspects, and we've got to have respect for those. There was a question that came in that I saw about buyouts, which might fit in here. There is certainly a role for buyouts in everything we're talking about. And it's a very, I'm a big proponent of buyouts. I think buyouts can serve multiple purposes. I think many of our engineers feel like it's giving up and it's capitulation. I don't think that. I think it is a strategic alternative that we have. There's lawsuits that involve addicts and particularly upstream on Addicts and Barker, where the plaintiffs that were flooded, 10,000 residents, have won at least an initial battle in the Court of Claims. The Corps of Engineers study totally neglected to talk about that litigation. It's a very difficult subject, to write about during the course of litigation, but it's a huge issue in what happens with Addicts and Barker. But I think it's a huge issue for the whole community. We developed Houston without a lot of regard for setbacks from the Bayou. We developed Houston with kind of a thought process that we were going to confine and control the water. That's just absolutely not happening. We're not controlling a flood like Harvey. You're going to live with a flood like Harvey at best. And Guy mentioned earlier making room for the river. A key aspect of making room for the river is moving people back from the river where they've encroached. And the Dutch are the originators of the make room for the river concept, and they have relocated huge areas of population and to simply make more room for their rivers so they could function better. So buyout is a controversial, but I think very important strategic tool that should be used much more, I think overtly, much more directly than it has. We've always used it as a default as opposed to a kind of a primary concept. And I think it actually belongs right up front in the repertoire.
I want to go to, because we're right at 9:32. Guy, I know you're going to say something, but let's talk a little bit about the wildlife along Buffalo Bayou. And, there was a survey evidently from Buffalo Bayou been to downtown, and it showed no tracks in the sand. So what are we overall trying to do with the wildlife, which we've hardly touched on during this whole discussion? And that's just for anybody on the panel that wants to answer.
Well, you know, wildlife can't live. You can't have a lot of our wildlife is burrowing. We have burrowing beavers. You know, alligators. Yes, We did have alligators, and certainly there's alligator snapping turtles. A lot of these creatures have to live in the banks. They can't get into the banks or even up and over the banks if the banks are hardened with a sheet pile or concrete or concrete rubble. And they need trees, they need vegetation to eat and to live on, and habitat for fish in the water and on the banks, which is created by the woody debris that falls in when the Bayou slump and the trees fall down, and they stay there unless the Harris County Flood Control District removes them during their maintenance operations. But that's one way of stabilizing the banks, is to allow properly positioned woody debris against the bank. That collects the sediment, helps cleanse the water. The vegetation helps cleanse the water. And the Port of Houston doesn't want all that sediment flowing down into its ship channel. So there are ways to both stabilize the banks and promote wildlife. And everybody should be planting native plants in their yards so that our wildlife have something to feed on. It's all part of a system.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me just add, everybody, let me be real quick. Everybody should canoe or kayak Buffalo Bayou. It's just wonderful what's out there. And, you know, I've got a beaver stick that was given to me by Don Green before he passed away, that he collected from the bayou, you know, that was kind of cut down. I mean, there's amazing wildlife out there. It's just, you've got to get out and see it.
Yeah, and I can speak from personal experience that before the park was even done, we had beavers gnawing and felling trees that were recently planted. So while that wildlife may not be completely visible, I think much of it is there. And I will say, Harris County Flood Control District, and we can, you know, criticize them for some of the things they do, but we were not allowed to start construction in certain areas because of red hawk nests that were in certain areas. And of course, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department gave us strict rules about protecting the Wabridge bat colony. Yes, wildlife needs to be part of the overall, you know, kind of goals of what we're achieving here. They're an important part of the ecosystem. I'll point out the Garden Club of Houston and their Great Small Trees project in Buffalo Bayou Park. It was all about reestablishing, as Susan was talking about, natives that are wildlife, birds and critters, as Terry used to say, can actually feed on and thrive, as opposed to the non-natives, which provide no value in terms of edible fruits and berries to our native wildlife.
Okay.
Well, can I just say one quick thing? Sorry,
Yes,
I just
David.
wanted to. We haven't really talked a lot about Buffalo Bayou East and the master plan that has been a several-year process. Buffalo Bayou Partnership's gone through with a lot of community interaction for the 4-mile stretch from 59 to the turning basin. And so I just wanted to encourage people to go look at that master plan and understand, you know, the tragedy it would be if the bayou was not in its natural state over there, and in its state, which is going to promote all of this great investment on the east side into the parks, into the trails, and then, you know, subsequently development that will happen around the bayou. There's some really important affordable housing projects that are in the works over there. And it would just be a real tragedy and a loss of potential economic development over on the east side if this happens.
And Marlene, I'd appreciate kind of building on David's comment, because one thing we need to keep in mind is the context within which we're having this discussion. I mean, we have people not in Buffalo Bayou East, but up on Halls and Greens Bayou that don't flood in a Hurricane Harvey storm, but flood in a 5-year storm or flood, you know, every year. And our elected officials are aware of the need for flood control all over Harris County, not just in this particular corridor. And I'm a huge believer in buyouts. And I believe, Jim, you correct me if I'm wrong, that no county in the country has undertaken a buyout program of the scale that Harris County has. And it's not enough. I agree we need to be doing a lot more, but it's not on Buffalo Bayou necessarily. We need to have that discussion, but elsewhere in Harris County, the Houston Parks Board has been buying out people from their homes, even and overpaying appraised value to do so in order to open up areas along, let's say, Hall's Bayou, so that those folks aren't at risk of flooding.
Good point, Guy. Okay, so with that, we're going to end the panel discussion. I appreciate everybody's thoughtful comments and time. I want to thank our participants for tuning in. Heather, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Marlene. And I'll just say that, again, thank you to everyone that joined us. We're going to have 3 more scenic morning sessions this morning. This year, not this morning, that would be way too many, this year. So we hope that you all can join us in the future. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, please do. You can do that on scenichouston.org. And once again, I just really want to thank our sponsor for this morning, New Leaf Real Estate. And thank you so much to David and Guy and Jim and Susan. You've been wonderful and you're such good friends of Scenic Houston. And we thank you dearly for taking your time out of your busy schedules this morning to help us think through this important topic. And Marlene, you did a wonderful job moderating, and thank you so much for being here. And that's it. We appreciate you all being here this morning, and have a great day.